I can't stop playing this freaking demo for Final Fantasy 16, specifically the iconic challenge. 16's gameplay is excellent in my opinion. It's a gameplay loop that is satisfying to get right and to continue learning and mastering, as it rewards you with more opportunities to showcase your cool abilities and really pile on the damage. It's hectic, fast-paced, and epic, just like 16, and in my opinion the gameplay is a simple secret formula, or even weapon, to its success, and why 16 may produce one of my favorite RPG combat loops of all time is because of this secret weapon. That may sound simple, but shockingly, a lot of games miss the mark on this. Balance. And I don't mean numbers balancing. You know, the one where one ability is stronger than the other. No. Au contraire, mon ami. For me, the balance between the combat loop that you can do, the buttons you press, the timing, the synergies, the customization, the progression, all of that, balanced with the encounter design, enemy makeup, pacing, and boss design, produce an overall experience that is wholly satisfying to me. Now, there are two components to what makes up combat, the stuff you do and the stuff the enemy does. Simple enough, right? But when there is equal development of both pillars, you get a solid foundation. The player has control of up to 3 icons at a time, essentially these monster forms that give you different abilities. Each of them come with a standard ability you get whenever and wherever. So for Phoenix that would be Dash, Garuda the Pole, and Titan you get a big block, as well as 3 additional abilities per icon that you can have 2 of at any time. So that's a total of 9 abilities, always active, 3 of which are locked in, and 6 being those ones that you can customize and slot in or out. That is on top of dodging at precise times, comboing correctly, parrying the enemy either with your sword or Titan's block, and keeping up time on the boss to do damage, so that you can pump out damage as much as you can. You also have a ranged attack you can spam or charge while also comboing it in between your basic melee attacks for a lot more damage if you can nail the timing down. That is on top of a few extra specific moves you have, like downward thrust or just thrust in general. That's what you do as the player. Fun and interesting enough with a lot to learn and get better at, which is something I value. But when you pair that with interesting and distinct bosses and encounter design, overall, that allows me, the player, to utilize those aforementioned tools in different ways to figure out the boss, to do as much damage as I can, or survive and take as little damage as I can, whichever is my preferred playstyle, in ways that feel different to one another, where each boss is memorable, not just for its music or visuals, but also for its mechanics. That is when you create an experience that is truly memorable to me. When I remember the individual movesets of each boss, not because they are annoying or just one-shot you, but because they are fun to solve and break down, as well as to counter, those fights to me are the ones I enjoy the most, when they aren't frustrating just for the sake of being frustrating, because that's the only emotion that those fights can evoke, but because I know I can do better, and that I can learn a little something new with each pull of the boss, and I can actively feel myself get better as a player as I overcome these encounters, because the things I bring to the table are fun and mechanically satisfying in terms of the buttons I'm pressing, but also because the boss I'm fighting is enjoyable to fight and to learn, because they are multidimensional and require thought and an interesting execution of the tools that I bring to the fight to overcome the challenge. The fights from what I've played all feel fair, and when I get hit, it's because I overextended or I got the timing wrong, and that is balanced in such a way where it doesn't feel like I'm just dodging random crap for half the fight instead of damaging. If you learn what you are doing, you can almost always be doing something to damage the boss or the fight, unless Benedicta wants to fly around for a bit, but I digress. That is what I personally like out of action RPGs, or just real-time action games in general. Not even, just games in general. A good blend between interesting buttons for me to press and interesting mechanics and enemies to counter using those buttons. And the thing that really hammers this home to me, that they themselves know this concept is, okay, the thing that tells me they understand this concept is how they are tackling New Game Plus. So for those who don't know, when you beat the game, you unlock New Game Plus, as well as a harder difficulty entitled Final Fantasy Mode. IGN has this in their IGN First, and I'll leave a link in the description, but what this mode does is up the level cap to 100, give you access to craft the Ultima weapon, and it swaps out certain enemy spawns for different but harder ones. This is a great idea in my opinion, for a game whose combat strength always seems to be the diversity in its encounters, and utilizing your kit in different ways and learning the various enemies and how to counter them. A great way to incentivize me to play the game again is to let me fight different things, because it's a different puzzle to solve. Fighting a regular soldier is a completely different bite of gameplay than compared to fighting a harder enemy. On top of that, our icon abilities and progression are carried over, to my knowledge, so we have access to our kit earlier on than we ordinarily would, which changes how I can fight certain bosses or just enemies in general. This is very similar in concept to how Halo used to tackle difficulty back in the glory days of Bungie, where you had different difficulties, and instead of just making enemies bullet spongy, you got different enemies, higher ranks of enemies, and different combinations of enemies, and it made each of those difficulties unique and identifiable from a glance, each with their different gameplay offerings, and that style of difficulty is always preferable to me than just say, oh, you get to fight Benedicta again, but this time her claws attacks do twice as much damage and she has a boatload more of health. Instead now, I assume she'll be a higher level, but we also get our full kit to play around with and utilize in that encounter, which enables us to fight her in different ways than we could before. I could use Titan's block. I'm assuming we only get Phoenix for that fight in the base game, but on the demo we could use Garuda and Titan abilities. So this allows us to fight her in different ways if we want to take the time and understand our kit. Navigating basic levels would be far more interesting since I'm fighting enemies that aren't just meant to be there for you to learn how to play the game. I can fight enemies that are strong and diverse in their gameplay to give me an ideal challenge earlier on. Ideally, I haven't done the Final Fantasy mode, but ideally this is how it would work. But if this is how that mode operates, then for me, playing the game twice will probably just be the default thing for me to do, because each playthrough would be different enough to keep me invested and engaged with what is happening. Hopefully these upgraded enemies aren't just basic, I attack, you dodge, and then you attack mobs, right? Hopefully there's some meat on those bones to make them engaging. Maybe a couple mechanics on them to, just for me to be on the lookout for. Just something to keep the player engaged on this quote-unquote hard mode. And from what we've seen in that IGN video, I talked about it before, again, link in the description, that seems to be the case at least for the mini-bosses. At least for what was shown. In the base game, you would have a wyvern in one section, and in Final Fantasy mode, you get a chimera. That is mechanics similar to the Chimera fight in Final Fantasy XIV. I love stuff like that. It keeps the game feeling fresh mechanically, and if the game is able to keep that pace up of introducing new and interesting mechanics and enemies on top of interesting enemy arrangements to create unique and memorable encounters throughout, while also delivering on the bosses and the overall design, I think 16 is going to be a good time, especially if the demo was indicative of the boss design going forward, since I enjoyed the Morble, the Dragoon, the Twins, and the Benedicta fight. You know, the Morble to a lesser extent, but that was just baby's first boss for Final Fantasy 16, so I'm fine with it. And if the game keeps that pace up, then I think the balance between having interesting mechanics the player utilizes and interesting mechanics that the boss does that the player has to react and counter could easily be Final Fantasy XVI's secret weapon, when the main points of conversation around the community and around the conversation around this game seem to be its story, darker tone, and its fast-paced gameplay. Honestly, this balance between having an interesting gameplay loop and interesting boss design and enemy design and enemy layout could easily be one of the main selling points of Final Fantasy XVI, in my opinion, and could easily be one of the most memorable aspects of this game. And to me, that is extremely critical for a combat system designed like this. In order for it not to feel spammy, in order for it to not feel repetitive, you have to have interesting encounters with unique mechanics that make you think on your toes, that make you do different things and utilize your kit in interesting and unique ways to counter these things. It should incentivize me learning more about the game and learning more about my kit so that I can utilize effectively the tools in my belt to counteract these scenarios. Because there's a world of difference from watching someone who has never touched a game like this before and then watching the battle director play this game and then nail every parry and every dodge, attack the will gauge effectively. There's a world of difference. You want to get that good because it also looks doable and it looks fun to do. That is one of the main aspects of difficulty I find gets lost in a lot of conversations surrounding difficulty. Just because something is hard doesn't make it engaging, doesn't make it fun. But when you can make the act of getting better rewarding and engaging, and I want to fight tougher enemies because I want to challenge myself because the gameplay loop and what I'm doing and what I'm fighting is so fun and engaging, that it makes me want to fight harder enemies to really try myself and to get better at. That's 2 thumbs up for me. That's what I like out of difficult games. Not just, it's a longer fight because we upped the HP pool, or we made the boss one-shot you with every attack. That's boring, that's bland, that's generic, that's derivative. The way 16 seems to be tackling it is interesting, fun, replayable, and looks like it actually took effort to design it, and I appreciate that aspect to it. It's what's making me so excited to play the rest of the game when it launches. So I'm going to call the video there for today. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure for making the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. And hit the bell icon to be notified when I upload and stream in the future, because I'll be covering Final Fantasy 16. Oh, you can bet it. And I'll be streaming it on this YouTube channel, youtube.com/@Jmulls. You can bet on that. So thank you all for tuning in. Stay safe. Have a great day. Go play some video games if you can. And as always, I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again.